This program is a paid commercial announcement from Jacob Media Partners and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program is pre-recorded.
Jacob Media Partners presents The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Presented by the law offices of Adam Malamut Associates. Powered by InjuredWorkers.com. And driven by Jaguar Land Rover Westchester. Now, live from the Malamut Associate Law Studios, The Adam Malamut Show. Hosted by Adam Malamut.
This is the Adam Malamut Show here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion every week on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Adam, back into the show tonight. Part 2 of what was a great show 1 week ago.
Thank you, Krause. It really was a great show, and I'm so honored to have our esteemed guest back this week to continue our discussion. So again, we've got Dr. Jason Palermo, board-certified cardiologist and advocate for nutrition, weight management, and exercise to stave off heart disease. Dr. Palermo is also certified in cardiology, internal medicine, and nuclear cardiology. We've got Keith Gentes, who is a certified civil trial attorney. He's the leader of our civil litigation practice group, and Keith is not just a leader of the practice group, but also a leader here at Malamut Associates. And we have Tony Drollas, who is an environmental expert as well as a trial attorney. He's got expertise in toxic torts. That doesn't sound very exciting, but it is very important, and you'll learn through this show exactly why it's important. Before we continue, I want to remind people that as the governors continue to loosen their restrictions, we need to maintain some sense of common sense to ensure that we don't have another outbreak of the coronavirus. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of those who have suffered and continue to suffer. We are meeting in a socially distant, responsible fashion for this show. And I want to remind everybody that this has been a terrible pandemic. It is not over. And despite the loosened restrictions, that doesn't mean that people should act cavalier and conduct themselves as they did pre-pandemic. That being said, I want to move right into our public health concern of vaping. Last week we discussed during part 1 of this show what vaping is. It's the action or practice of inhaling and exhaling the vapor produced by electronic cigarettes or a similar device. It's like taking the steam as this device heats up and the toxins that are put through the steam into your lungs, which you will hear discussion today by our medical expert and by our attorneys, who are both experts in handling toxic torts and environmental concerns, how bad this really is for you. This is so bad that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and the FDA, who are not always in agreement, have taken this issue to task. They have taken this issue. The FDA is looking for information on product design and ways to keep the public safe. June 19th is when they're asking for this information to be presented by, and there's a docket associated with the FDA. You can find me on social media, as Krause pointed out at the beginning of the show, and will again on break. If you have information, we're happy to help facilitate that to the FDA. What we also know is in October of 2019, the FDA issued a consumer warning to stop using THC vaping products. So states that have been legalizing marijuana, one of the common ways to ingest the marijuana has been through these vape devices. And what Dr. Palermo discussed in our last show, and we'll touch on a little deeper on this show, is how those products really cause significant injury. We're also going to get back into the information that has been put out, and I'll call it propaganda, but the inducement to purchase, the inducement to use these products has been in large part flat out false and flat out predatory to those who are either trying to wean themselves off of cigarettes or other nicotine products. Vaping has been touted as a safer alternative. So with that being said, I'd like to go right over to our medical expert, Dr. Palermo, and talk about what types of injuries you're seeing as a result of people who are using vape products.
Thanks, Adam. I think it's, we talked a little bit about some of this last week, but we have a whole host of injuries from, the direct lung injuries, the long-term injuries with COPD and emphysema, the risk for heart disease, potential for stunted growth, discussion about how it can affect brain development in teens. There are a whole host of injuries when we talk about vape-related products, and I continue to use the analogy with nicotine and cigarettes that we've dealt with over the last several decades and recognized over the last 50 years or so. So I think those really bring us back to some of the main injuries that we're talking about.
So, Tony, we've talked before about the chemicals in these products, and I know that we talked last week about popcorn lung and about the chemical that is used in microwavable popcorn. I mean, how frightening is that? How many times do you go, hey, I'd like some popcorn? And you go over to your cabinet and you pull out this bag of popcorn, you throw it in the microwave. We use the term nuke generically, but that's exactly what we're doing. We nuke our popcorn, and then we go sit down, ingest it. I usually fall asleep during the movie, but we sit down and ingest the popcorn. Tell us about these chemicals.
So the chemicals are similar to discussions we've had in the past, Adam, on other shows as well, that in many walks of life are innocuous when they're used for a certain purpose, but then when industry, for whatever reason, decides to change the purpose and use them in some other means, guess what? They have harmful human health effects that you don't find out until the product is out in the stream of commerce. With the popcorn lung, for example, diacetyl, a material that's used in a preservative and for other purposes in microwavable popcorn, when you ingest it through your stomach, it's harmless, but when you inhale it through these vaping products, which were not studied long term as to their adverse health effects, the products were just introduced into commerce, and in fact they were pushed on young people as an alternative to smoking. Now, only until they get out in the stream of commerce, like we've discussed in the past with PFAS, Teflon, when it's used in some purposes, it's perfectly fine, but when you ingest it, it not only is harmful, but it's something that stays with you forever. And the adverse health impacts are going to something that we're going to be continuing to study over a period of decades. We're finding the same thing with the additives and the chemicals that are in the vaping fluids, vitamin E acetate, something that's used to dilute the THC oil that's used in some of the vaping devices. When you inhale it, which no one studied before they introduced it into commerce, we're finding that it's having harmful impacts on people. Unfortunately, at the same time, it's combined with nicotine, which is highly addictive.
So we talk about these chemicals. I want to continue talking about these chemicals when we come back from break. But this is my shout out for our friends at Farmers Against Hunger. It's a great program ran in Burlington County, New Jersey. I assure you that the fruits and vegetables that they're putting out, and that give you an opportunity to eat healthy and eat fresh foods, they don't have these chemicals. Is that right, Tony?
Of course not.
Okay. So when we come back from break, we're going to get back into the chemicals and help people understand the importance of what it is that you're ingesting and the dangers of ingesting that.
Adam's a great follow on social media. You can track him down on Instagram at attorney_Adam_Malamut. We'll get to our first commercial break on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT.
The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion.
Some say e-cigarettes aren't dangerous,
But science shows nicotine can harm teens' developing brains.
no matter how they're exposed.
Let's do an experiment to find out.
Here's a teen who won't be using e-cigarettes.
Now we need one willing to risk their brain development.
Anyone care to volunteer your kid?
Anyone?
I'm Dr. Vivek Murthy, U.S. Surgeon General. Your kids are not an experiment. Protect them from e-cigarettes.
And as we come back here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, Adam, I played that CDC warning audio drop again, just so the listening audience can wrap their arms around the magnitude and the severity of the conversation. Really, really good information.
Thanks, Krause. You know, this is an important topic, and like all of our topics, you know, these are topics that are not regularly discussed. People know that it's bad to vape because they've heard that it's bad to vape, but they don't necessarily know why it's bad to vape. With that being said, we've got some great guests here today. Tony Drollas, Doctor Jason Palermo, Keith Gentes. Tony, I'm going to come right back to you. We were talking about the chemicals. Let's talk about the chemicals and the marketing and how that induces the American public into a false sense of security as they use these products.
You know, as we talked on earlier shows about forever chemicals and how some things never seem to change, you know, how could something like this happen again? We were talking about PFAS, how chemicals could become so widespread and so harmful. But now that they're regulated, how can this happen? Well, guess what? It continues to happen. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of a lot of government regulation. And but at the same time, I've always been suspicious, not unfairly, of the notion of letting industry regulate itself, because it's amazing how, in pursuit of the almighty dollar, what industry does sometimes will just blow your mind. And this is one shining example of that for me, and it's actually infuriating as a parent of teenagers myself to notice that because the vaping devices with flavors like cotton candy and fruit squirts and cupcake and mango, which are clearly not flavors that you would think are designed for older adults who've been smoking for decades and are looking for a safer alternative, but it's clearly marketed to children to get them hooked on this because it's not tobacco. Which is, you know, just being, you know, from a legal standpoint is being very fine and being very accurate and being very appropriate. That's but from a fairness standpoint, from a moral standpoint, if not to get too melodramatic about it, but it, you know, the intention of it was clear, was to get younger people hooked on nicotine and these vaping devices through what? Through social media, not through print advertising, not through television commercials, not through radio shows, but from the one communication device that far and away is the most popular means of spreading the word and getting people hooked, and hiring influencers, as they're known, to go out there and push the product to make sure that younger people understand that this is something that they need. Because, you know, of course, that's how you sell something to younger people, not something that they might want. Teenagers change, you know, from day to day in terms of what they want, which is fine. They're supposed to have open minds, but it's marketed to them as something that they need, as something that will make them more attractive, will get them connected with other people who like the same thing, which is, you know, a very dangerous trend that you can spread on young people. And unfortunately, where it's not regulated, but the regulation of it has been delayed. In the meantime, industry has put the pedal to the metal, and they have pushed the idea. And sad to say, it's not like they're promoting another flavor of carbonated water or seltzer, where if you don't like it, you're done with it, you may never think about it again. But you're being induced into trying a substance that's highly addictive. So that once you try it, in some cases, there may be extreme examples, but from the first time you try it, you're hooked, and you can't get off of it. So not only is the addiction to the nicotine a problem because of the huge quantities of what you're ingesting, but it's causing problems to young people while they're ingesting the nicotine, and then it causes further problems with them when they try to withdraw from it.
You know, you talk about the marketing, and we're all old enough to remember in some fashion the Marlboro Man. The Marlboro Man was this guy who, you know, was chiseled out of the Rock of Gibraltar, and, you know, every female thought that he was a good-looking guy. Every guy thought that he was a cool-looking dude, and he was the social influencer back then. You know, people think of social influencers and they think of people from YouTube and Instagram and people who get a whole bunch of likes, and that makes them a social influencer. But back then, there were social influencers, and the Marlboro Man, who we're still talking about today, I don't know how many years later, was that social influencer. And the power of social influencers, you see people on television shows, reality shows that have used vape. You see people in public, whether it's the entertainment type magazines or television shows, that are people that are of notoriety using the product. Doctor, how hard is it to walk people back and make them understand there are real risks associated with this when you're competing with somebody, and I don't want to misuse a celebrity's name or falsely accuse a celebrity, but when you have people that are, multi-platinum recording artists, how does Dr. Palermo walk somebody back from that? I mean, although you're a good-looking guy who has his own legend, but how do you walk people back?
I was sitting here as you guys were talking about this, thinking the same thing. I'm thinking that, the social influencers are so much stronger as far as their effects on culture and society. And although I can educate the people I encounter, and we could do things like this radio show to educate some of my patients who hopefully are listening as well, I don't have that kind of influence. I can influence a few people with my words, but that social media, the marketing campaigns are so much stronger. And we have all the major societies in the medical, related to this, the American Thoracic Society, the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology. They have some money, they have some resources to try to fight public health campaigns for these big public health concerns like this, but they don't do it as well as the big industry does, right? And we're not used to doing that as a medical community. That's not something that it's not our strong suit. I can educate as much as I can on an individual basis, but as far as influencing a population, it's a hard battle to fight. I can only do kind of one patient at a time. You know what people don't realize? The tobacco industry, we all have heard about the tobacco litigation and the lawsuits surrounding the tobacco industry. What people don't realize is the tobacco industry has not died. As a matter of fact, it reinvented itself. This is the tobacco industry. This is the new iteration of the tobacco industry's business model. So the big money behind vaping is tobacco. So where the tobacco industry may have lost market share with cigarette smokers, they way more than made up for it with what seems to be this cool vaping. God, that sounds cool. What a great product. It tastes great. They've got, as Tony said, cotton candy and Fruit Loops and whatever other, passion fruit flavors you have that probably are not the same as what you'd get out of a box of cigarettes. But the tobacco industry, in my estimation, you can't ignore the fact that they, again, are putting profits over people. And we've done other shows about profits over people, and this show is that's not the intent, but that's certainly the unintended byproduct of this show. It's, again, profits over people. Keith, profits over people. What are we looking at? And we're going to go to break in a minute, but you want to give people a sneak peek at where we're going in the next segment?
Yeah, we're going to identify those who have causes of action, against whom those causes of action will be levied, the theories under which those causes of actions can be levied, and the resulting damages that will ultimately affect and change behavior in this regard.
So we talked in our last show about the FDA and the CDC's involvement, and they get involved for a couple reasons. They get involved because of lobbying activity. They get involved because of conscientious legislators who recognize that there's a public health safety risk, and they get involved because of litigation. And people can look, as a lawyer, I've taken probably every lawyer joke that's out there. I'm a good sport. I'm happy to take more lawyer jokes. But the fact of the matter is, if it's not for activism, you don't have watchdog agencies that have real powers, because they do. You have other watchdog agencies, but these agencies have real powers. You don't have them take any action without some call to action that results in new policy, banning of products, greater education programs. And right now, what the vaping industry has done was they, colored a picture, but it's not what they colored. It's a different product.
This is the Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Back in a moment.
From the Malamut Associates Law Studios, this is the Adam Malamut Show.
He is updating on the numbers of the lung illnesses associated with vaping. They are now up to 1,299 and 26 deaths across 21 states. Now that's up from about 1,080 last week and 18 deaths. So this continues to grow. The CDC saying that essentially the same breakdown of what people used. Most used a THC vaping product, though some did exclusively report using nicotine-containing products. Still no information about the exact thing that is causing these lung injuries, but the numbers continue to grow.
And thanks so much for listening to the Adam Malamut Show as we come to you on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. The mission of the Adam Malamut Show is to educate. You've checked that box again, sir.
Thanks, Krause. Look, it's an honor to have these guests, Tony Drollas, Doctor Jason Palermo, Keith Gentes. We've got real subject matter experts, and we talk about our show. Our show's tagline is Real People, Real Opinions. These are real people, we have real opinions, and we have real problems. And without these types of opportunities to educate the public, you're going to have big business dictate what it is that we use as consumers. And in this case, the vaping products are I don't want to be so grave as to call them death sentences, but certainly sentences for health problems down the road. So with that being said, we left the last segment with Keith Gentes talking about how we really keep this issue in front of the regulating authorities, how we keep it in front of people like the FDA and the CDC outside of their hearings and their testimony. Keith, talk a little bit about the litigation component.
Well, sometimes, as you alluded to earlier, lawyers are good for more than just their punchlines and whatnot. But in all reality, lawyers act as the last line of defense for the consumer. We're here to ensure certain protections are afforded to the consumer against big industry, big business. So in any type of litigation, we have to, take a look at who are the parties involved. So from our perspective, we're looking at who potentially has a cause of action. And we touched upon this a little bit last week when we talked about the individual versus the community. Anytime an individual has damages as a result of the different theories of law, be it negligence, product liability, so on and so forth, they're going to have a cause of action. The community also has a cause of action. When I say the community, I mean different institutions, and I'll touch upon that a little bit further as we go on. But there are different theories under which each particular party can pursue a cause of action. Now, who are we pursuing those cause of actions against? Is it just, the manufacturer, the distributor? Well, as Tony alluded to in a segment or two ago, we attack everyone in the stream of commerce. It's not just the manufacturer, it's the distributor, it's the marketers. So when you have your product going into the stream of commerce to be purchased by the consumer, you can't harm them, right? It's pretty common sense. So it's not just the people that design the product. It's not just the people that put it into the stream of commerce. It's not just the people that design the manufacturer. It's a totality. It's the aggregate of the effect. And all of those individuals, companies, corporations are going to share their potential responsibility or liability as a result of their actions to get this product to market. We talk about damages, dealing with these type of issues, any type of health crisis, from the broad perspective, we're looking at increased costs, health costs to the individual and to society as a whole, because we have to spread that out. I'll let the doctor talk a little bit more about that because he certainly sees that more as a day-to-day basis. But again, we also have the specific damages to the individual, whether it's a psychological, a neurological, a physical injury. And we'll get into the community damages a little bit more, but I'll digress to the doctor to talk about the increased health costs that society's bearing as a result of this action.
And I think that's an amazing point, but it's hard to even quantify. So it's hard to quantify what the financial cost is. We're fighting against an industry that's putting, by some accounts in 2017, $8.6 billion of marketing money into vaping, and a whole generation of teens and 20-year-olds who are potentially being hooked, and what that means down the line. It's going to be a huge battle, and we've gone through battles like this before, and it will take decades to reverse some of the things that can happen with the addiction here. You're talking about young people who are being injured directly, with some of the lung injuries that happened last year. The median age for those vapor-related lung injuries was 24 years old. So, we're talking about a generation of people here, and the actual cost of that is going to be monumental.
Yeah, we've talked about the cost to the individual, we've talked about the cost to the community, and when I say that, it's a more of a generic term, but since the focus has been so much about how it's affected the youth and the younger generation in terms of society, one of the institutions is our, boards of education. They're left holding the bag to kind of deal with some of these problems, and when I say they're left holding the bag, we've talked about different psychological effects, depression, things of that nature. Schools are having to hire more counselors to come in and deal with this issue. It's a pervasive issue. It could be situations where it's so prominent because of, pressures to fit in and things of that nature and whatnot. You're having kids that dovetail with their different depressive aspects. They're having poorer performances in school. They're having to go out and hire tutors, things of that nature. Schools are actually bearing the cost of educating their students about the dangers of vaping. You're seeing schools posting and hanging signs in terms of the dangers of vaping and whatnot, and somebody's got to pay for all these things that necessarily weren't foreseeable and built into the budgets and whatnot. You're actually having people congregate in bathrooms and whatnot, so schools are having to hire additional security, purchase vape detection equipment because a lot of these vapes seemingly are could be mistaken for like a USB drive. They're so, out of hand, out of sight, whatever the case may be. So there's some of the community costs that are involved. So how does each representative get to the end, get to the point where they can collect on their damages? And there's a couple different overlapping theories that both the individual and the community can use. One of which is obviously products liability, the design defect, the failure to warn, a design defect being something more in the lines of an explosion or something of that nature. Failure to warn meaning not giving all the details. Obviously, they're doing a sleight of hand because if they gave all the details, common sense would dictate that you probably wouldn't make this purchase to begin with. Theories of negligence. What does negligence mean? Well, it means that you can't do something dumb to somebody. You can't do something mean to somebody. You have a duty to not harm the person. So you have ordinary negligence, which is doing stupid, and then you have gross negligence, which is doing mean. That kind of goes more along the lines of fraud and whatnot in terms of misrepresenting facts, not giving all the particular details about the amount of nicotine, the equivalence of, how much nicotine is in the cart versus how much nicotine are you going to take in via a pack of cigarettes. And I think that's something that's still somewhat ambiguous in that regard. Fraud cases where it's just outright misrepresentations of factual conclusions and whatnot. They're not telling the public about all the different harms and things of that nature. The community also has different theories of public nuisance. You have actors that are creating and maintaining dangerous conditions to the public health. That falls right along the lines of a public nuisance. So those are just some of the different theories and some of the things that I forecast seeing coming forward, and different theories of law and different theories of damages under which this bulk of cases is going to develop.
It's interesting when you look at how the marketing and what the business model is for not just vape products, but we're going to talk about vape products, but other things that are not good for you. There's a progression, and it's like they take the same business model and they move it around for different products. There's a social influencer that you see, right? You see a social influencer. You hear that it's a safer alternative to something else. We don't know what else, but to something else. They get you to spend money on their product because they create this false sense of trust, this false sense of security. The print that they put in disclaimers is so far that there's not a telescope on the planet that can see it from 10 feet away from the TV. You then ingest these toxins. After you ingest the toxins, you become addicted. Nicotine, which everybody's heard about nicotine, there's not a listener out there that hasn't heard the term nicotine. Nicotine is the bad toxin that resulted in all of the advertising and warnings and litigation coming out of cigarettes. Nicotine is addictive. Nicotine has withdrawal symptoms. The withdrawal symptoms include irritability, headaches, increased sweating, feeling sad, anxiety, feeling groggy or tired, unclear thinking, hunger. Nobody wants that, right? Especially during the pandemic. I'm still trying to squeeze into my suits. And having intense cravings for more e-cigarettes. They're selling you a product that makes you buy more of their product. They're not selling you a farm fresh item that you can take and say, hey, this is something that is not toxic. This is not going to hurt me or my family or my health. They're selling you something that's going to force you to come back to market to buy more of their product. That, I think, is what I find to be most offensive. And we'll come back to Tony in a minute when we come back from break. I know he's got some concerns about children and their use. We've talked about this significantly, but we're going to go to break. And when we come back, I want to talk about how this is marketed and how it's sold.
Broadcasting here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. Questions, go to malamutlaw.com. That's malamutlaw.com. Back in a moment.
Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Now back to Adam Malamut.
So we're about to round the corner here. We're headed home on the fourth segment of our two-part show on vaping. I want to thank, and I'm so appreciative that they were able to participate, our guests, Keith Gentes, Tony Drollas, and Doctor Jason Palermo. When we took our last break, we were talking about nicotine. We were talking about how big business is yet once again duped the American consumer and is selling poison. And I want to flip it over to Tony. I know, Tony, we've discussed this topic, and you've got some real concerns about this.
You know, the idea that this has actually been widely marketed and it's targeted to teenagers is something that, you would think, as we've discussed, is, something that you can't imagine would happen again in society. You think we've fallen off this bridge many times in the past. We've learned our lessons. There's rules in place. This could never happen again. And specific to cigarettes, you're not allowed, the industry is not allowed to advertise the sale of cigarettes. They're certainly not allowed to advertise them to young people. But since this isn't tobacco, and since this isn't exactly a cigarette, then industry just goes full throttle in the same vein of exactly what they did in the past in marketing cigarettes to everyone, but in particular to young people, and use social media to frankly have an even greater impact on young people, to sell them something that's not only something that might be attractive or might make them attractive to other people or might get them in with the cool crowd because everybody's doing it, but unfortunately, you're messing with your central nervous system and your heart and lungs because you're ingesting a chemical that is extremely addictive and can have short and long-term health effects. So if there's anything to me that couldn't be more infuriating these days is to see how the same industry and those new to it are exploiting the idea that a substance like this is something that can be pushed on young people, and for one purpose, is to make a lot of money, and they have. And unfortunately, the money that they've made is something that they may have to be paying back to people to compensate them for the injuries that they're causing. It's infuriating, again, is the word.
So, Doc, coming back to you, the diseases that we've discussed, and I think that we've put out there enough diseases to make folks' heads spin, but I don't know that they appreciate necessarily what COPD is and what the other cardiac consequences are. We talked about increased cholesterol, increased incident of heart attack. Can you just get a little bit deeper into those?
Well, I think those are big problems. I mean, we're talking about, again, COPD or chronic lung disease, and how it can affect your breathing on an everyday basis, and vaping being one of the likely causes going forward. Although we've cut down on cigarette usage, vaping is a big, concern now. A big public health concern. It's a major public health concern, and it's there's a cultural lack of awareness going on. I mean, people don't understand that vaping is cigarettes in disguise, and maybe worse, right? So, I think when we talk about lung disease like COPD, how it increases your risk of other complications, right? In the world we're living in, you're talking about people who are at risk for the COVID-19, infection, and you talk about lung injury as one of those, or people who have lung disease. I think it's, to me, a problem that people don't even identify vaping as smoking. No one would come into my house and light up a cigarette, but yet I've had people come into my house and think it's okay to vape, right? And it's just appalling to me that people think that that's okay, personally, for themselves, but also I have young children at home, and the secondhand exposure and just a lack of respect for what that is something that people don't seem to have at this point. It's not okay, and it's not anything, but cigarette smoking in a lot of ways, or maybe worse, but it's not okay.
We've talked about different causes of action, Keith, and we've talked about we don't know what we don't know still. But as far as keeping track of your health, obviously the best thing to do is to not vape, and to seek a medical professional if you need assistance getting off of or withdrawing from vape. I hate to sound self-promoting here, but we've got a lot of information on this. I mean, this is something that there may be causes of action out there as people are injured. They should absolutely reach out to an attorney, right?
No question. Not knowing what you don't know is a very dangerous situation to be in. It's always best to consult to see what other information is out there. Contacting us, we'll be able to give you what information we've found and just talk you through. It's particularly troubling just because of what a coping mechanism it is in terms of such times of high anxiety and whatnot, and dealing with COVID and whatnot. So it's particularly more troublesome to me during this period in which we find ourselves.
So, the interesting thing is we all need to have some ownership of this. Parents need to talk to the kids. There are people listening all over the country. I'll give my normal disclaimer. If you are in need of legal services, we can always help you to direct and redirect you to the right lawyer. Every state in this country and internationally, you can hear our show. So what we speak to in terms of legal causes of action may not apply in your jurisdiction, and we may not be licensed to give advice in your jurisdiction. That being said, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can help you get good advice in your jurisdiction. In closing, I want to talk about how we can help, and this is something that I've been thinking about as we've all been talking and having young children like Tony, like the doctor, like Keith's about to have. It's important to me that we do our share. So I want to make a commitment, and I'll make this commitment to our listening audience, that we will dedicate a portion of our website to purely educational information and links on vaping. I don't feel that we can cover this topic in 1 or 2 shows. I don't think that we can cover this topic over the 52-week run of our shows. I think that there's so much information that is constantly developing, and this is such an important social issue for us to address. We're going to dedicate a portion of our website, and I hope you'll visit www.malamutlaw.com. It is going to take us a little bit of time to get it up there, but within the next couple of weeks, we'll have significant content. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to use the Malamut Family Foundation. We're going to make a donation to help educate students in public schools and help fund programs for them to learn the dangers. So I'm going to wrap up our show on a little bit more of a somber note with talking about those issues, but then again bring it back for all the thanks and gratitude I have to Keith Gentes, Tony Drollas, and Doctor Jason Palermo for what has been an amazing 2-part show on vaping. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to our listening audience for tuning in. Again, we're on radio.com. Search Adam Malamut. We can also be found on iTunes and certainly on www.malamutlaw.com. So until next time, thank you. Take care. Have a great evening.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program has been pre-recorded.